Hi, everybody. This is Clay with Claiborne Education with another LSAT logic game setup for you. I intend for this video to be watched in concert with the other videos from Prep Test 88, which is a very interesting test as far as the logic games goes. And this particular game, the third game of Prep Test 88, is one of the primary reasons why the test was so interesting, unusual. You don't see many games like the way that this one is laid out. So it's definitely an interesting one for us to look at together and to make sure you're ready for this kind of game. As always, out of respect for copyright, I'm not going to read out the game to you or put the copy of it on the screen, but I'm just going to kind of dive right in and think about our setup, even as we think about the nature of the game. So I'm going to go ahead and talk you through it as I begin to draw it out. We have here a grouping game with the difference, the primary difference being that there are 5 groups, which is more than usual, and each of them has 4 players or 4 elements, some of which will need to repeat. So that's just a lot more information than we typically have in an LSAT logic game. It takes a while to write down, to really process, but something very interesting is going to happen when we actually get into it and find out what the limitations actually are. I think you'll be surprised at what takes place once we get to that step. You can put 4 dashes in each one if you'd like. I'm just going to go ahead and start in writing in some of the things that we know just to save time on the writing. We, of course, have the flowers, and in the opening paragraph, as is always true with grouping, you always want to see what the numbers are telling you. What do the numbers reveal? Anything about distribution? Well, we've got, each one needs 4 flowers, but of only 3 kinds. So clearly one of the flowers is going to repeat, and each person is going to have a 2-1-1 distribution of flowers. That is, one kind of flower will be in there twice. So as we start to go through the rules, we want to keep that 2-1-1 in mind throughout the entire process. For example, when we start with S and say, all right, 2 roses, well, not only do we want to put 2 more blanks, but we want to recognize, 2-1-1. These 2 other kinds are going to have to be 2 different kinds, whether they are G's or H's or L's. It's one of each of one of those, G or H or G or L or H and L. Those are the possibilities in this case. Now, we're going to apply once again the 2-1-1 as we kind of work our way across, because the rules conveniently go in alphabetical order here. Thank you for giving it to us that way. For example, when we get to T, here it's a little bit different. We find out that she has an H and a G, so we actually still need the double flower to appear. Now it says that she has exactly 1 H. So I'm going to put a not H up here to communicate H is present, but further H's are absent. But now she could have like a second G, or it could be 2 R's, or it could be 2 L's. We want to be thinking as we go through, always putting on that inference hat, that holistic mindset of putting things together, even as we combine it with the decision tree method where we work out all the possibilities, as indeed we will do on this example. Now, when we get to U, we have an R and an H, no more R's, just so similar to the H's on the previous group. And then once again, we still need to know what flower is doubling up, keeping in mind it could be the H's that are doubling up. We'll come back to that. When we look at gardenias for W, now we already have the doubling in this case, right? So we're just going to need 1 each of 2 other kinds. All right, and then finally with Z, now this is interesting because like we actually had on the first rule, I didn't mention that with the first rule, but it says that S, and no one else uses 2 R's. Nobody else can have a double R. But we also learn over here that Z has this HR combination exactly, and nobody else can have that. Well, that's a very helpful rule. Once we start to think about the implications of it, And Z is going to be a great place to start for our decision tree process as well. Because if it's only one H and only one R, no more H's, no more R's, then we still need the doubled up flower, but it can't be H or R. It's got to be the G's or the L's. Are you hearing the either or in that? Two branches of the decision tree. We can go down the G's branch or the L's branch and see what it is we're dealing with. Now, before we do that, this is something that we might even discover kind of from writing it out. But notice that it says H, R, and those are the only ones, but we have another HR over here. There's an inference to be made here as we start to think about how this needs to look. This can't just have HR as soon as we see that Z is the only one with HR, but we can't add more R's, so we must add another H. Major inference for this game. You might have arrived at it by drawing it out, but when you want to also capitalize on those phrases like no one else, say, all right, what is the implication of that? They're probably telling me something that pays off either immediately or down the road with that no one else. Now, having put that in place, let's think about Z again. As I mentioned, Z could have two G's, in which case somebody else has the two lilies that are mentioned in the last rule, or else other option, Z has the two lilies that are mentioned in the last rule. So first off, let's just go in alphabetical order and give Z a couple of G's to fulfill the rule. Now it's got a 2-1-1 arrangement. But somebody else has to have the two lilies. It can't be S because that would be 2 and 2. There's no room here. It can't be W because that would be 2 and 2. So it must be T in this case. Very helpful. We know exactly who the one person is who uses two lilies. So all that remains is to see if we can come up with any other details about the remaining flowers. If we start with S, let's think about the possibilities. I alluded to this before, but we know that G, H, and L remain. So we could have GH, GL, or HL. It looks like any of those would be fine. So the question really is, do we want to write out the three possibilities? Now, normally I would say yes, but this game is so writing intensive already that it's probably better not to. You could just write them out to the side, GH, GL, HL, something like that. You know, put an or in there. Hard to write on this whiteboard, so forgive me for that. Appreciate your patience. GH, GL, HL could go in there. That's probably going to be sufficient because actually writing those out would cause you to have to write out a lot of other things as well. And here's another important principle according to which I made this decision. If you're asking yourself, should I write out a number of possibilities? Should I produce the game boards involved? The answer is yes, if it's going to lead to other inferences about other aspects of the game. Putting in GH, GL, or HL here would not lead to inferences about other players. So I think it's good just to leave it at that. Now moving on to U, we know that we just need another one. It's a 2-1-1 relationship. The other one needs to be a G or an L. That fits in with the slash perfectly well. And at first glance, it looks like we don't know more about W, but remember that powerful no one else rule about Z. That tells us we can't have an HR over here. We need a 1 and a 1, but it can't be an HR combination. Inference, we therefore must have an L in W. That's the only way to avoid an HR because the G's are done. If we didn't have an L, we would have an HR violating the rule. So notice how much we filled up in our first example. Now, decision tree wise, that really just leaves only one other branch, and that's putting both of the L's in Z and seeing what happens. Now that might have sub branches. It might lead to other outcomes. Let's try it and find out. What we're going to do is put in the two L's here, and then we're going to copy the things that we knew before, including the inferences. We knew not only that G was there, but we inferred that it has to be L. We knew not only that RH was here, but we inferred that it has to be another H. Here we just knew the HG. And remember now, we can't have LL here under T because it can only be in one place. We're putting it under Z and then RR. So I'll just put spaces where we need to finish up. Going left to right, S is really in the same category. So everything we said before is still true now. GH, GL, HL. What about T though? Anything we can say there? Well, let's think about the HR thing. That's really the rule that kind of keeps coming back and bearing fruit in an inference. We know that we can't just put one R here because there's already only one H. If we were to put one R, we'd have the HR only. So it looks like if we're going to put any roses here, we have to have two of them. But that's where the other no one else comes in, that language of no one else. S and no one else uses the two roses. So we can't have one rose here and we can't have two roses here. Nice inference that there are actually never any roses under T. Again, you could find that out by actually trying to play it out. If you put it in, you'd want to look over your whole set of game boards, look at the rules again and say, did I follow every part of the rules, including the no one else? And then hopefully you'd notice it and be able to cross that one out. Now, if we can't have R's here at all, we can't have two L's, we can't have two H's, we got to have two of something. Nice inference. There's a G. And then the last one, since there are no R's, has to be an L. Very nice, filling up T there. Here, it could be G or L. Nothing is going to force that in, just as before. And here it could be H or R. Also, nothing will force that in. But here's the beautiful, unexpectedly beautiful thing about this game. Option 1, option 2. It looks like an enormous mess where we're not told enough, so it appears, to make the inferences we need to really have kind of a high yield situation. But if you get your hands dirty, you dive in there and you try it out and you say, over here with Z, these are the two branches of my decision tree. What if it's two Gs? What if it's two Ls? And then you realize each of those what ifs really does allow me to discover a huge amount of what remains. Granted, there's a little bit of uncertainty still with S. There's still some slashes here and there. But you transformed, if you do this in advance, you've transformed what looks like a very difficult set of questions into a much easier set because of the framework that you've already set up. In the context of all of Prep Test 88, this one probably still does take the longest because it's going to take several minutes to draw out what we've done here, including the possibilities that maybe didn't work and you crossed out. It just takes a good while to make those necessary inferences and kind of think through how the rules are interplaying with one another. But once you've done that, the questions really do fall like dominoes. And while I'd be really impressed if you could break 10 minutes on this game, there's no reason it has to be more than low teens. And since this game should take the longest of the 4 that are presented, the other 3 are significantly more straightforward. That allows you to finish this section with some room to spare if you can hit this in, say, 12 minutes or so. So I'd encourage you to give it a shot. Don't have these notes in front of you. Go back from the beginning of the game. Maybe after a while, once you've kind of forgotten what I've done here, reproduce it. See how quickly you can do it with the questions. But the bottom line, remember that our videos are seeking to drive home to you is that the setup is where the power is. And if you're willing to stop staring and start scribbling, get in there and see what's possible, you very often will blast the game wide open before you even get to the questions. It's certainly true in this game, and you'll see it in many others throughout our videos.